This is Mural, an online whiteboard that I really like using. I also like using Mural's API. This is Visual Studio Code, and here I'm trying to use Copilot to generate some code that uses the Mural API. When I prompt Copilot to read all the widgets in a given Mural and then print all the widgets returned, Copilot comes pretty close. Of course, the Mural API reference information would have been a vanishingly small part of any large language model's pre-training data, so it's not surprising that Copilot might not generate exactly the right code for this. For example, response.data.widgets is not a field that exists. You can use the fetch feature to cause Copilot to pull the contents of a web page into the prompt as context. So for example, here's the Mural reference API for the endpoint that I want to use. You can see it's specified all the parameters to call, and importantly, it gives information about the structure of what gets returned from the call. So back in Visual Studio Code, if I add the fetch command and then include a link to that reference information, you would think Copilot could get it right now. Unfortunately, it didn't. Here we still have it's printing response.data. That's not right. And you might think, well, how can that be? We gave it the web page that has all the reference information. Why isn't Copilot getting the right answer? For comparison, I made a local doc web app and I copied the reference information into this little doc app. It's not the greatest, but when I make the same prompt to Copilot again, and this time I fetch my version of that reference information, now Copilot is able to generate exactly the right code. Why is that? To see why that is, let's use this little Python script that does simple web scraping. When I try to scrape the information from the official Mural documentation, you can see that there's some navigation links and stuff like that. And then at the very bottom, there's just this. That's all that's available to a simple web scrape. So that must mean that the content that we can see in the page must be loaded or fetched somehow sometime after the main page loads. Or it's formatted in some really complex way that is difficult to parse, which is not an uncommon thing to do. But the result is that simple web scraping doesn't get enough information to make Copilot successful. Whereas if I scrape my little doc app, you can see tons of really good information. And that's because I designed this doc app specifically to make Copilot successful. Here you can see the Node.js server side code. It grabs HTML content for the reference information, it grabs some code samples, and then it passes that on to a very simple web page that you can see here. And this is why when we run that simple scraping tool, all the information is immediately available in a format that's easy for Copilot to use. Let's try it with another example here. Now I'm prompting Copilot to create a new sticky note and add it to a given mural. Again, the generated code has some mistakes. The endpoint itself is not correct. The data that's being passed has an invalid field in it and is missing required fields. And I've asked Copilot to print the ID of the widget that gets created, and Copilot is trying to use response.data.id. That's not right. Here's the website with the official Mural reference information for that endpoint. So let's use the fetch feature again with that web page, and maybe Copilot will be able to be more successful. It's a little bit better. It's got the endpoint correct this time, but it's missing required fields in the data again, and it still hasn't printed out the ID properly. So here again is my version. Here, my little doc app. It's got all the same information. But when I use the fetch command again with my version of the documentation, now Copilot gets it exactly right. And that's a bit fiddly. Response of data, value is an array, and you take the first one, and then you get the ID. That's pretty fiddly. Copilot got it right. And why is that? Well, again, if I use that little Python script to scrape the official Mural documentation, you can see there's just not enough there that's returned with a simple web scraping operation compared to my little doc app page that was created to make Copilot more successful, and all this information is immediately available. What this demonstrates is how you publish your reference information can make or break the use case of somebody trying to use an AI integrated programming environment, like in this case, or for people who are building function calling AI agents of any kind, MCP servers, whatever. Now, of course, there's no way to know for sure what exactly Copilot is doing. And of course, there are more elaborate ways of scraping web pages. But the point here is, why would you make it harder than it needs to be? Think about it from a business perspective. You want people to call your APIs because that's how you make your money. Mural presumably wants people to use their APIs. But at this point, anybody who's building generative AI solutions that need to pull reference information in for context, those solutions can't succeed because for whatever reason, the way the official Mural documentation was published, the models cannot get the information they need to pull in to their context. I'm not trying to pick on Mural. I love Mural. But this is something that a lot of content teams might not yet be thinking about. We spend lots of time making sure that a human reader is going to be able to navigate the content successfully and get all the information that they need. But now we've got this new persona, which is the RAG solution builder, the MCP server builder, the developer who's using AI integrated coding tools. All of those users need to be able to be successful with our content too. So from a content strategy perspective, we need to start testing and making sure that our API reference information is available for models to use.